Once a month, when the moon reaches its highest point in the sky and the wild creatures call out to the night, he emerges from a private sanctuary in an undisclosed location outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. Arrayed in his priestly vestments, carrying forth the good news that comic books and graphic novels aren't just for kids, that they aren't just mass and spandex superheroes, that storytelling in a graphic format can be so much more. He is the graphic novel apostle.
Hello and welcome back to the Graphic Novel Apostle podcast. I am so happy to be here with you as always on this Monday morning, and we've got another fun book in store for you today. I'm here with my friend Hannah, and we are going to be talking about the book Art Brut by W. Maxwell Prince, with art by Martin Morazzo and letters by Matt Lopes. And then also some additional letters and some of the backup stories that we'll talk about in just a minute by Chris O'Halloran. Letters for this book were done by Good Old Neon, which I'm assuming was not a given name of that creator. And this book was originally published under a different title, Electric Sublime, by Jetpack Comics back in 2016, although it didn't have the backup stories that we're going to talk about included at the time. But the version we're going to be talking about today is the 2023 reissue that adds those backup stories. It has the lettering redone and the new title, Art Brut. This came out beginning in December of 2022 in 4 single-issue comics, so it ran through the spring of 2023 and has since been collected in a really lovely hardback book. And so, Hannah, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Oh, no doubt.
Funny that you mentioned that because there was a couple comments in here that felt like they were inside jokes for people who had read the previous edition, because it said something about the lettering has gotten better and it mentioned the title, and I was like, what is this Electric Sublime? What is that? So I looked it up and I was like, what?
Oh,
so,
cool.
That's cool.
Yeah, there were a couple of self-referential things in there like that. So before we dive into this story, and specifically why I asked you to get into this story, I want to do just a couple of quick reminders for people. First, as always on the Graphic Novel Apostle, we're going to be talking about all parts of this story. This is spoiler full, not spoiler free. So if you don't want to be spoiled about Art Brut, well then take your opportunity to go find a copy at the library, download it, buy it from your local comic book shop, and then come on back after you finished reading it. Also want to remind you guys how you can get in contact with me here at the show on Instagram at Graphic Novel Apostle, on Twitter at Mark Orenberger, and by email at graphicnovelapostle@gmail.com. And let me throw this out there too. You know, I've always heard podcasters say this, and I've not made a habit of doing it over the years, but hey, if you'll go to your podcast platform and leave a quick review, even if it's just a few words like, I love the show, keep it up, Mark, or 5 stars, no notes, something like that. I understand that is really, truly helpful when it comes to like algorithms and stuff like that and helping other people find the show. And for those of you that I harangue in real life about whether you've listened to the podcast yet or not, if y'all recruit some more listeners, you won't have to worry about me asking you quite so often. So let me encourage you to go ahead and do that. But now let's turn back to my friend Hannah. Hannah, let's talk about this book.
Okay.
So I want to talk to you. I picked this book for you specifically because you are an art teacher and an artist. And we're going to get into that. But let me go ahead and read the solicit that appears on the back of the book first. And so listeners will have maybe some idea of what this story is. Although really until you get into the meat of this story, you really don't know what this story is because it's pretty out there.
No, it's pretty out there.
Alongside the Bureau of Artistic Integrity, Arthur Brut, the mad dream painter, and his trusty sidekick, Manny the mannequin, must dive back into the very paintings that made him insane, or reality itself might just crumble to pieces. Equal parts police procedural, hyper-fantasy, and psychological thriller, Art Brut is a veritable Pollock splatter of comic genres tossed onto the giant pulpy canvas. Plus, each chapter features whimsical Silver Age-style backup stories revealing the painterly past adventures of our addled art hero. So before we talk more about this story too, Hannah, you know, it's all preface here with me. We're going to build and build and build for 20 minutes before we get into anything.
I do love that about the podcast.
Well, you know, I can't do it any other way. That's just who I am. But what I want to say about this creative team, so W. Maxwell Prince, Martin Morazzo, and, you know, in this case, the colors were mostly done by Matthew Lopes in the original, but coming to the backup stories for that, you know, were presented for the first time in this new edition, Chris O'Halloran on the colors. This same team, less Matt Lopes, has been creating a comic book that has been hugely successful called Ice Cream Man. It is now in, I guess as of this recording, I think they're probably getting close to issue number 40. I don't keep up with it issue by issue. It's one that I read in the collected editions, and so I'm usually a little bit behind. But that is a horror anthology book, but with this same art style, largely, at least the way Martin Morazzo draws like the main character figures in this. And I mean, you'll see here, having not been exposed to that other book, that these characters like unsettling looking.
Yes, definitely. I, as an artist, am picky about my animation style, and this style is really good at what it is, which is being kind of horrific, which is being kind of unsettling, and that's not a style I generally like, but it's perfect for this story.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, that's something with, as I've explored all different types of comic books, there is a lot of art that I look at and I go, I don't like it. And then once but you know, usually it's, there's a writer that I really like or whatever. The idea of the story is one that appeals to me, so I'll give it a try anyway. And half the time I find myself feeling very different about that art because it fits the style, because it's the right tone for that book. And I go, okay, this is not what I would want to hang on my wall, but boy, did I like it in this comic.
Yeah, and I've never been like a Halloween type person or anything like that, and so this kind of thing is unsettling for me, and I usually avoid it, but it is a good story. It's just not one that I would have picked up naturally. Also, like being a teacher, you get used to separating your personal preferences from actual like critique, because like I'll have students who want to draw scary clowns, and I'm like, I hate that. Do it. Like, I don't want to see them. I'm going to have nightmares, but let's look at it. Let's see what you can do better. Let's see how scary we can make that clown.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Martin Morazzo has no specific scary clowns, I don't think, in this book.
No.
But it has plenty of disturbing figures, close enough.
Yes.
So I want to talk a little bit about your background with art, the types of art that you tend to like. Tell me a little bit about, I mean, obviously you studied it in school, but where did being interested in art as a career start for you?
I think art has always been the thing that I'm good at. My mom was an artist, but she was a mom first, but she taught me a lot, and I just kind of like kept going from there. And when I was like, I'm gonna major in art, my dad was like, but should you? And I was like, it's the thing that I like, and I will find a job somewhere with it, and I didn't want to like settle for something that I was going to be really unhappy in. And so art teacher, is where I ended up.
Yeah, absolutely. So you did your undergraduate degree is a Bachelor of Arts in art?
It's fine art, yeah. And then I got a master's in education.
Have you've been teaching your whole career since you finished school, haven't you?
Yes. There were a few years where I was figuring out where to go, where I worked at, like Target and stuff like that, but everybody goes through that.
Sure. What grade levels, though, have you taught along the way?
So along the way, I currently teach 6th through 12th grade. Along the way, I've mostly taught high school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you find that most of your students that are coming in, let's say at the high school level, I guess art is typically an elective by that point, and so are they folks that have some style developed already, or is it people who are curious?
It is a huge, variable because, yes, I've had students who I'm like, they're going to go on, they're going to, do something in the art field, and it's going to be impressive, and I might see their name later. And I've also had students who, purely a hobby, that's just this is the elective that is the most fun. I don't want to sing. I don't want to perform on an instrument, so I'm going to do art. And then you've also got the kids who, literally thought my class was going to be the place where you didn't have to try and figured out they were wrong.
Well, so be careful around Miss Hannah for anybody who's listening out there. What art mediums have you enjoyed to explore mostly over your lifetime?
Currently, mostly what I like to do is pottery.
Okay.
I love, making stuff out of clay, glazing it, figuring out, it's such a long process. I enjoy, figuring out what happens as you go along. I have really enjoyed printmaking at times. Printmaking is also a long process and takes a lot of big materials, so it's hard to do both at the same time. And then I also enjoy painting, and I love oil paint because it takes a long time and you have to be patient, and I'm hearing myself and I'm like, wow.
So when you do an oil painting, what's your process like? Do you start on paper and sketch something out and then sketch it on the canvas? Or can you talk me through that?
Yeah, so with a painting, I definitely plan it out on paper first. It may not all come together on paper. I did a large painting of a world map, and I sketched out the map to get familiar with the shape of the continents and how did I want the ocean to look. And I did a sketch of the animals that were around it. I put some sea creatures on there as kind of like a reference to old style maps that would have like mythical things in the ocean.
Here there be dragons.
Yes. So I did some individual studies on each of those, and then kind of sketched it together to figure out the composition, how everything would work together. And so you do like, at least for me, I would do like little color studies, and then I would do like full composition studies, and then eventually got it all onto the canvas together.
Wow. How do you make the transition from the paper to the canvas itself?
I think I just kind of like jump in. I know that sometimes if it's a more technical drawing, you might use a strategy, you might use a projector, something to kind of enlarge it and allow you to trace it. But you can also use something called a grid transfer that, we've probably all opened up a coloring book and seen those pages where it's like there's this big grid and there's a little drawing of your character. And for a long time, I didn't understand those pages, but as an adult and as a teacher, I use those pages. I teach my students how to use them, and
Sure.
it helps.
You keep that spatial perspective.
Yes.
Talk to me about Georgia O'Keeffe.
I love O'Keeffe.
Well, I've been to your house.
Yes.
And so I know that you love Georgia O'Keeffe. So please talk to me about that.
So O'Keeffe's style, her brushstrokes are just beautiful. She rides the line between realism and abstraction for me. She creates this illusion of reality, but at the same time, when you get close to the painting, it feels like a painting. It doesn't feel like a photograph. So I just love that. She is very similar to Impressionist painters, but her strokes come together more. Whereas like Van Gogh, you see the individual colors. With O'Keeffe, it comes together as a full piece.
Are there particular artists, other than Georgia O'Keeffe, who you've studied and like taken as your inspirations? And whether those are artists people would have heard of or artists that you saw in a sketchbook someplace, where have you drawn inspiration from to incorporate and form your own style?
As a younger artist, Van Gogh was definitely like up there at the top of my list. And then as I learned more about more artists, O'Keeffe moved up the list for me. But mostly I love realism that isn't realistic. So Impressionism is really where I love to look, because Impressionists are worried about painting the way we perceive things, not the way they actually are. And so I don't love myself to do, I love to look at a really technical drawing. Those are so cool. I don't want to spend the time to do something super technical. And I love the emotion that is more evoked when you've got like, okay, the way the sunlight reflects off this, that's what I want to capture. I don't want to capture exactly how it's shaped.
As I've looked at a lot of, say, superhero comics, I see those and I go, you would never mistake this for a person, like an actual person, right? But, I mean, even just thinking back to the cartoons we watch as kids, you see the figures and you go, well, yeah, that's a person. There's no confusion for me about what that is, but yet it doesn't exactly look like, the features on your face as I sit across the table from you. In your study of art, has art history been something that has interested you very much?
Yes, I love the stories of art history. The way art history is taught a lot is memorize these names of the painting of the artist and what year it came out. But I love the overarching story and like how so many art movements, like the Fauvists, they're called the Fauvists because critics said, your paintings are wild, you're a wild beast. That's what Fauvist means, is wild beast. And they went, we are wild beasts, deal with it.
That's awesome. And I suppose that gives you a whole deeper perspective on what that art style means.
Yeah.
So I was so excited to pick this book for you as an art teacher, as someone who I know knows about different artists, and some of the pieces that are incorporated into this book would be more meaningful to you probably than they are to me. They're things I recognize.
There's a page where I wanted to stop and just like identify every artwork. I made myself not at that moment, but later I did go back and I was like, I know what this is, I know what that is, and I I figured it all out.
Well, and I think I know what you're talking about, and be sure to point that out when we get there in the
Sure
story.
thing.
You know, I listened to this interview with Martin Morazzo where he was talking about what was exciting to him in this book. It was actually a co-interview that was done by Comic Book Club, which is another fantastic podcast, one I love to listen to. But the guys from Comic Book Club had both W. Maxwell Prince and Martin Morazzo on together for an interview. And Prince, as the writer, was saying he always wanted to do a story about art history. And then Morazzo was saying that he really appreciated the challenge. You know, he's so used to drawing in his own style, and then having to recreate some of those classical styles of all different types. And it's so impressive. And then actually vary them, though, from what
Did he draw them? Because, you know, I know, like, in today, they could have digitized these images and dropped little pictures in, but he drew them, or he colored them?
So I can't answer that question.
Okay.
I wish I could.
Yeah.
I remembered hearing the interview, and I went back and listened to it again last night. This interview was from like a year and a half ago, because I remember him talking about that some, and I'd come away from the interview with the impression that he was redrawing those, but it may very well be that he is somehow taking an image and then altering it. And then there are other places in the book, particularly like we'll talk about with the Scream, where he has sort of redrawn the Scream not to look exactly like the Scream.
Right. Okay, so that's probably what he's talking about, which, by the way, I love the Scream in this book. It's perfect.
Well, I'll look forward to talking about that. All right, well, let's get into the story a little bit. So issue 1 of our story is called The Winking Woman. And our story starts out with a group of tourists, and they're taking a guided tour through the Louvre. And their tour guide is obviously well educated on what he's presenting to these people.
He's also quite pretentious.
He's very pretentious. And he's telling them, don't take pictures. You should perceive this with your eye.
Yes.
Don't, put those phones away.
Which can be a legitimate perspective, but the reason you can't use your camera is because flash photography is bad for pigments.
Okay.
And I just thought that was funny, that was the spin he put on it.
Sure. Well, this guy was so excited, though, to be showing off and, does a big to-do about now we're entering the room where you'll see the Mona Lisa. Of course, he's looking at the crowd. He's not looking at the painting itself, and he's hearing reactions. And some are the traditional ones that you hear about the Mona Lisa, like, oh, it's so much smaller than I thought it would be. But then someone saying, I thought both of her eyes were open. Someone says, yeah, she's winking. What is that? That gets the attention of this tour guide. And he turns around and just freaks out. He starts yelling and calling for something called the BAI. We got to get the BAI in here. And we'll learn that's the Bureau of Artistic Integrity, which is sort of like the cops for art crimes. But don't think like art theft. Think like someone has somehow tampered with the world of art and turned it on its head. Almost like a paranormal investigative agency. And he's yelling in addition to that, we're going to need the dream painter. We're going to need Art Brut.
Yeah.
And so Art Brut is going to be our hero through this story. I looked up, I figured Art Brut probably meant something. And so I looked it up, and Art Brut refers to either native art or raw art. So that would include basically anything that's say, traditional academic art.
Okay.
So it'd be things like graffiti.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and really that's who this character is, right? I mean, this is a character in Art Brut who has a high appreciation of fine art, but is also seeing a much deeper world within the art.
Well, and the funny thing is like all art that we consider fine art today at one point was considered not good enough, was considered art brut for the most part, because each new invention or reimagining of how we make art or what's considered art, like, caused big turmoil in the art world.
Okay.
And then, like, that's why we have different styles, is because, like, somebody went, yeah, but what if I could do something different? And everybody went, no, it's terrible. And then a lot of other artists were like, yes, freedom, and got on the bandwagon.
Oh, that's interesting. So it tends to be the disconnect between artists and art critics?
Yeah.
Do you see that as much historically from other artists, that there is a pushback or resistance to new styles? Is that part of it?
Yeah. Like, well, artists can be highly critical of each other. And it's funny when you read things about, like, the way Michelangelo was. He was actually kind of like an off-putting personality. We know that Van Gogh and Gauguin lived together for a while, and they were both terrible roommates. Like, it's weird stuff. They're artists, but they're humans. They're just as likable and disagreeable as anybody else. And It's
How
funny.
funny, yeah, to think of those classic, those names we hear of spoken in like the most revered terms. But of course, they would be humans like anyone else. Hey, before we go any further with the story, I can't believe I didn't get to this. You tipped me off just before we started something about your overall impression of this book.
Yeah.
And it kind of blew my mind. So let me ask, overall, what did you think of Art Brut?
I wasn't a fan.
No.
So I do love a good cop drama, but I really like for things to have a happy ending.
This one does not.
This one doesn't. So, spoiler, we already knew we were spoiling things, but also the style is very grungy with thin lines. Like the way that he uses thin lines, the way that things are dotted and there's too much detail sometimes. You get this sense of like a photo that's up too close.
Okay, so it gets just a little out of focus?
No, like a really clear photo, but of like the spittle in the corner of your mouth.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So it reveals too much of the ugly that tends to get sort of filtered.
Is perfect for this story, like, because it's kind of an ugly story, if you put it that way.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not an uplifting story.
No. So when you look at the characters, one of the first things I noticed was like how defined the cheekbones are. I was like, they're a little emaciated. What's going on here? But it kind of tells you the story before it tells you the story.
That's right. And, I'm glad you pointed out the cheekbones. Especially we noticed this in Director Breslin, one of the characters that we'll meet here just in this first issue in a minute. But that was one of the things that I don't think I expressed well about how in the world of the book Ice Cream Man, everything is so off-putting in a way. And there, when you're telling horror stories, and particularly like the creepy type of horror stories, it's perfect.
Right.
But it's unsettling here, too.
Yes. Well, and the thing is, if you're looking for a horror story, you don't want it to be bright and bubbly and stuff. Like, this is right for this genre.
Sure. Although I wouldn't call this one a horror story, although it's plenty horrific.
It's like existential horror. Like,
oh, yeah.
It's not very gory, but it is kind of like the dread of what could happen and the dread of like interpersonal kind of things.
Mm-hmm. Although there is some gore in this too, although it tends to be gore that looks more like paint than real blood.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really creative.
Yes.
So obviously I had a very high opinion of this book.
Yeah.
I think W. Maxwell Prince, through Ice Cream Man, through this book, through another one he's done, I believe it's called 7 Days in the Library, that I've read of his, I just think his mind works in such a different way than maybe any other comic writer who's producing work right now. And so I see it and I go, okay, I'm going to get something different. And I am drawn very much to horror. I'm drawn to the unsettling. And so maybe that's in part why I like it so much. But with this one, I also thought the use of classical art, and maybe classical is not the right term, but the art that we think of when we say art.
Right.
With our eyebrows lifted just a bit, incorporated into this very weird story. But you know what? I'm going to forgive you for this not being your favorite book you ever read. So we took a break, listeners, for just a second to take a phone call. And as we were just chit-chatting, getting ready to get back on the microphone, going back to that idea of existential dread, you mentioned another, is it a show?
Yeah, it's a show on YouTube. So,
okay.
Depends on your definition of show.
I live with a 9-year-old. That's what TV is.
So I enjoy watching a channel called Critical Role. We watch them play D&D, but they also play a version of Call of Cthulhu, or like a horror version of D&D that they call Candela Obscura. And basically, your characters, going into it that they're not going to make it, that they're not going to overcome this bad thing.
Sure.
And so the whole goal is to just kind of like go as long as you can without going insane, but you're like, and your character knows like the bad thing is going to happen and you are going to go crazy.
Oh, this fits so perfectly.
Yeah.
And to give a preview about those backup stories that appear at the end of each of the 4 issues that make up this Art Brut Volume 1. And it's funny, the book is called Art Brut Volume 1, but so far there's only the one volume. So, I'm hoping there will be another volume. Maybe you not so much, but I am. But in those backup stories, they tell of an earlier time in Art Brut's life where he was, as we're going to discover in a moment, when we meet him, he is in a mental hospital.
Yeah.
And under pretty intense care. But earlier in his life, he was not. He was perfectly sane. And through some of his adventures with the BAI, he was driven to insanity. And so what you've just described is, I mean, that fits perfectly with what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's exactly what he's going through. He is slowly growing insane, but feels called to keep working this way. Like, it's either let the world burn or just let myself go insane to save it.
Wow. And that is Art Brut's dilemma a little bit, too. Specifically the art world we're talking about, but I suppose we'll see some of this has an impact on the world beyond just our having the ability to appreciate fine art. Mm-hmm. Well, let's go back into our story for a second, and as always, we try and include some images from the book to give people a sense of the art. And the first time, I just described this part where we turn and see that the Mona Lisa is winking. And I'll put that page there. This is the page where that tour guide is calling for, we're going to need Art Brut. And we see this beautiful reproduction of the Mona Lisa. It looks just like the original, except that her left eye is winking. And it's really weird to see it that way.
It is.
Especially because that's like a half-page image, and the top half of the page is the regular art.
Yeah, the sort of classical realism next to the modern cartoon.
Yes.
Is kind of jarring. I love that the frame is also a cartoon drawing. It is not a dropped-in photo of a frame.
Right.
And so it kind of like lets the worlds bleed together a little bit more.
Yeah, it's a highly detailed, I guess you would call that a gilt frame.
Yeah, you could, yeah.
And you're right, but it is obviously hand-drawn.
Yeah, I think the level of detail lets it work better.
Sure.
Because if it was just a simple frame, you'd be like, that's so, like, not what the Mona Lisa would be in.
Yeah, it's, they're not putting it in some wood thing from Hobby Lobby, huh?
Right.
So we've put out the call for Art Brut, and we're going to next move ourselves into a mental hospital. And we meet director Margot Breslin, who is the head of the BAI. And she's being walked down the hall by a nurse of some kind who is taking her to the room where Art Brut is staying. And we learn that Art Brut is a dream painter. In fact, that's what he's doing when we arrive. So he's in this all-white room with, like you hear about with padded walls, basically.
Yeah.
And he's in a hospital gown, and his hair is all a mess, and he looks like he is, he's disheveled. He clearly is disturbed.
But she's walking by these other patients who are in distress, and it's just that classic, like, this is a terrible place to be, kind of feeling like, this is a hospital, but we're very uncomfortable being here.
Yeah, for sure. But Art Brut is in the midst of what he calls dream painting. And in this case, he is painting this really lovely multicolor swirl, this like swirling image of a world with himself on top.
If you imagine the background of the Starry Night, but in warm colors.
Yeah.
That's what he's got here.
That's right, much brighter. More reds and oranges.
Yep, reds, oranges. There is a few greens, but there's some purples. It's very warm. And he's floating on top of it.
And so what we basically figure out here is that dream painting is sort of like a state that he goes into, almost like art goes into a trance, and he does this kind of painting, and it allows him to be in full possession of his faculties.
Yeah, I feel like there are two states where he enters art. And this is kind of like a half state, like he's half there. And there's another one where he goes fully into the paintings.
And I can't wait to talk about that. We'll get to it very soon. This is when he goes into what's called the world behind the canvas.
Yeah.
Art is also here with a small wooden mannequin that he has that, has multiple points of articulation so that he can move it around to do sketches. Have you ever used one of those to do, modeling for sketches?
I have not. We own one. I don't use it that way. I typically look up a photo reference of a person for those kinds of things. But I think that that's just because we live in a modern world where I can.
Sure. And it doesn't look like Art Brut has access to the internet here.
No,
in
it
his
does
room.
not.
So Art Brut is talking to Manny the mannequin here in his room at the hospital, which seems very unusual. Although later, when we go into the world behind the canvas, Manny is a happy, alive, he's a sidekick.
Yeah, I feel like here we're establishing that Art Brut is insane.
Yes.
We're establishing his psychosis.
That's right. So we also get this weird little aside where we go to a whole different, place. And there's a mom driving her son, who looks like he's maybe about 12 years old,
Okay, can I just tell you, when
Yeah.
I started reading this, I didn't see the tiny little curly elsewhere in the corner. And I was like, oh, what is this? And it was very jarring. I was trying to figure out where I was in the story. And I thought that this was Art Brut as a child.
Like a flashback.
Yes.
Okay.
And it took me until when we see Dylan again much later to figure out that they were not the same person.
Oh, wow. Yeah, this is happening contemporaneously
Yeah.
in our story. Oh, that's funny.
Well, and part of it was I was really trying to look at him and be like, okay, are there any features on this kid's face that tell me it's not him or it is him? And ultimately, the artist is the same, and so there are certain characteristics, like the way he draws a mouth, that are just going to be the same across all characters.
Sure, that's right. You take this boy, Dylan, who's riding along with his mom, and as I was starting to say, he's probably about 11, 12 years old, something like that. And you say, what did Art Brut look like as a kid? Sure, this could be it.
Exactly.
So they're driving along this roadside, and this kid he's being silent, he's not talking, he's just sitting there with his sketchbook, and he's drawing a really impressive sketch of Vincent van Gogh.
Yep.
And his mom is trying to engage him in conversation, and he won't talk. And at some point, they pass by this field of cows, and she says, what does a cow say? And he doesn't answer her.
Yeah. As a teacher, I've had students in my class. Like I have students who are in the special education program, and I've had students who are nonverbal. Mm-hmm. And so like my first thing here, like the age of him being like 11 or 12 and her asking such a simple question like what does the cow say tells me he's got some developmental thing going on. And it was like such a frustrating moment to witness.
Yeah.
To see like he is clearly very gifted in one area and struggling so hard in another.
Yeah, that's right. And we'll learn in just a second. That's why they're driving right now. He's being taken to this institute that treats kids specifically with high talent for art and other types of either delays or disabilities that impact the way they interact with the world. So as his mom is repeating this question to him, Dylan, what does a cow say? He has turned over the page from his drawing of Van Gogh, and now he starts drawing a cow. And it's a very good sketch of a cow, except he puts X's over the eyes.
Yep. And he finally gets the word moo.
Yeah. Just looks at her and says moo in a very disturbing way. And as our panel broadens out and we look a little further, they've gone on down the road closer to this institute that they're driving to. But on the corner of the foreground, we see that pasture they'd just passed, all the cows are now dead.
Yes. This is definitely like one of those moments in a scary movie where it's like the characters look away and you see the thing that they should be scared of. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh.
Yeah, that page turn had sort of an element of M. Night Shyamalan in it.
Yes.
Well, let's jump back now to the Louvre. Art Brut has been brought out of his hospital, and he's been taken over to the Louvre, and that same tour guide is there trying to explain to him, what happened.
What I think is funny about this is that this tour guide, he's the same person as in the beginning. He is very, self-absorbed, I was there on the first case that you were a part of, and I signed off on this paperwork, so there's evidence I was there. Mm-hmm. And I just love Art Brut's reaction to him.
Right. You want to tell us about that?
So this guy gets done with what he's saying, and Art Brut is like, all that noise coming from your mouth, it's like a kazoo, like an awful kazoo. I just love that he just shuts him down.
That's right. And it's clear because of his lack of grip on reality, this is really the only way he knows how to relate to this guy. And he's got his finger dangerously close to this man's mouth, like he's trying to inspect
yes.
it. Why is the sound coming out of this? Well, just a moment later, there are some guys that come into this room with guns, and we're going to learn maybe these are the people who are responsible for this defacement of the Mona Lisa. You have one leader among this group, and they're all wearing these white suits.
Which, by the way, these suits are awesome.
Okay.
I hate that the bad guys are wearing these wonderful suits. They're just a white suit that has had paint splattered on them that feels like a watercolor wash.
Yes.
It's so beautiful, and I would love to wear it.
I was trying to think of how to describe it, and I almost wanted to say, it looked like it had been tie-dyed.
Yeah.
But I don't want to give the impression of a very elaborate tie-dye.
No.
Because there's so much white.
Because a tie-dye, it follows the waves in the fabric when it's folded, when it's wadded up, and this looks more like splatter across the flat clothing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And and it's all different colors. It's blues and greens and yellow and purple. And all of these henchmen, other than the leader, are wearing an eye patch over their left eye. But who does our leader of the bad guys appear to be?
So I know the answer to this because it's explained later in the story. At this point, I'm just like, this guy's interesting, okay? All of his henchmen have mohawks, and he's the only one allowed to have hair.
So this did not jump out to you as Andy Warhol?
No, it did not.
Okay.
But Andy Warhol, he is a more modern artist. I feel like the older an artist is, the fewer images we have of them. So we have one iconography, one image to go off of. Like Van Gogh, that portrait, that is a self-portrait that he painted that has been reused over and over again. Whereas Andy Warhol, if you look up a picture of him, he's so modern, there's photographs of him.
Right.
We can see a lot of him. And so, like, I think it's just a matter of he's not coined in one specific way.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So I've hinted here and there on this show that I'm a great lover of professional wrestling.
Okay.
And there was some period during what they called the rock and wrestling days of the 1980s in the WWF where, they brought in like Cyndi Lauper and Mr. T, and for whatever reason, Andy Warhol.
Of course.
At some of this stuff. And I want to say it was in like a locker room interview during WrestleMania 1 that they go back in the back and they've got Mean Gene Okerlund and he's talking to Andy Warhol and he says, what did you think of tonight's event? And he says in just the most flat, affected way, oh, it's the most exciting thing I've ever seen in my life.
So let me just ask for a little clarification. Was it actually Andy Warhol or was it somebody pretending to be him?
No, it was him.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Andy Warhol, like if you look up quotes by him, they're the strangest things. Like he says, people today are plastic. I love plastic. I want to be plastic. Like he says these things that are so abstract and strange.
Sure. What is, I mean, I guess pop art? Is that what his style is called? Or what is?
Yes, he is part of the pop art movement. His age of painting, and most of the paintings that are in this are from a very narrow space, a very narrow time period, is the beginning of art divergence. Like before this, the paintings fall into very discrete time periods and genres. And at the start of modern art, including pop art, we have a divergence where many artists are going many directions and people are appreciating it. Like there's cubism existing at the same time as pop art, and there's other genres like color field painting and impressionism. They're all kind of happening at the same time, and so it's really interesting. Like when I would get to that point, because I would teach my students art history in Art 1, when I would get to that point, I'd be like, okay, so everybody's been kind of doing the same thing at the same time. Now there's so much and so many great artists, we're just going to hit some highlights.
Oh, wow. Can you roughly date that period where it becomes modern art?
I am terrible at names, at dates, but it is right after Impressionism.
Okay.
Like, Impressionism said, I can make realism that isn't realistic, and everybody else went, oh, what else can we do? It's also at the time when cameras were invented.
Okay.
Because before that, you needed to be true to reality or complementary. Like, you needed to portray your emperor or your king as the best version of themselves so that they could be, the ruler and respected, and you wouldn't get beheaded.
Yes, right. That's I think a major goal of most artists.
And then the camera is invented, and as it gets more and more widespread, the less artists feel obligated to do realism.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I had never thought about the impact of the camera, this technological impact on art.
Yeah.
I'd never heard that.
Yeah. And then you see Andy Warhol started commercial art.
Yeah.
Because his artworks, a lot of them, the Campbell soup can, the Coca-Cola bottles, he did like Brillo pad stuff. He was hired by those companies to create posters to advertise their product. So some people give him a hard time. They think that he's doing copyrighted things. He's not. He has the copyrights. There are other artists who got in trouble for that, but he's not one of them.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
Oh, this is so cool. I love having you on here for this.
Yay.
Well, so this is not a friendly, happy Coca-Cola Andy Warhol, though, that we're meeting here. In fact, he's got a flamethrower, and all of his henchmen have guns. And they start opening fire on everybody who's in the room. Like our tour guide, or our docent, I guess you would call him. He gets his right eye shot out, and so he's killed right there, and they start taking the flamethrower to all the other paintings that are on the wall. And so Art Brut grabs director Breslin by the hand and starts running toward the Mona Lisa, and he's also holding his mannequin in his hand as well. And then he just dives through the painting. And that's where this gets, for me, it's like, okay, now we're going to do something really cool.
This is a very cool part of this story. It reminds me of in C.S. Lewis books, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yeah.
It's the one where they have the painting, and the painting comes to life and flows out of the frame.
I love the Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe books.
That's
and
not
I can't
that
think
one.
of that.
No, that's...
or the Chronicles of Narnia books, right?
It's Prince Caspian.
Oh, yeah, that's right. At the beginning with Eustace.
Yes.
Okay, that's right. He's looking at the painting on the wall, and then he starts to feel seasick, basically.
Yeah, and they're like, was that ship there before? And then all of a sudden, like, they're being swept off into the world of the painting.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't even think of that. That's exactly right. Except this one, Art Brut knows what he's doing. He dives in head first. And once he gets inside this world, of course, director Breslin is completely disoriented, but she turns, and we see Art Brut in a whole new light here. He looks healthier. He actually kind of takes on like a Daniel Craig, James Bond almost look.
Yeah.
And there's a decomposing woman in decomposing clothing, and I say woman, basically a skeleton with just a little bit of hair left, on this chair, and he's got his leg propped up on it, like in this very fashionable looking pose. And apparently that is the Mona Lisa. And he says, "Poor Mona. Hello, Margot. Welcome to the world behind the canvas." And the last thing, though, with Mona Lisa here, we see that she has one remaining eyeball, and there's a crow or something like that that's plucking it out.
Ugh.
Yes, that's right. So the last thing to wrap up this issue before we go into the backup story, we finally arrived here at the clinic for Dylan, or the Institute, and we're meeting Dr. Oldenburg, who's the director of the clinic. And he's explaining how, with all the students there, they incorporate their art into their methods. And Dylan has already found himself in the room with all the other kids, and some are doing sculpture and some are doing paintings. And he is just sitting here on the floor, and he's got his sketchbook, and he has drawn the Mona Lisa with one eye missing.
Yep, or winking.
Or winking, that's right. And he says, "Hi, Mommy."
Yeah.
And so, we've already seen him sort of touch the outside world.
Looking at these, I just want to go back to their, expressions on the different characters, like his mom and the doctor. His mom is uncertain, which is normal, right? Because she's dropping him off at this institution. And she's trying to figure out, how do I feel about this? Watching the doctor's face morph as you go through them, when he opens the door to this room, he has a manic smile.
Oh, it's an evil smile.
It is so evil. It is the Joker level. And I was like, what is this page turn? Because of the surprised look on the mom's face.
Oh, yeah.
She looks scared, like she opened the door and, the dog threw up everywhere. Not like my kid's drawing.
Yeah, that's right. And Dr. Oldenburg has this look of excitement.
Yeah.
I mean, crazed excitement, but excitement all the same. We'll know, later on that he's found somebody who might be suited exactly for his purposes.
Yes. He's not necessarily a good guy. The other thing I wanted to look at is the expressions on all the children. Dylan's smile does not reach his eyes. His eyes are still upset, which could be a failure in the drawing aspect. But I don't feel like that. I feel like this artist knows what he's doing. Mm-hmm. And he's creating this sort of dystopian feel. Because the other kids are not smiling. They don't look happy either.
Yeah, his face here says to me, if I'm just trying to read his emotion from his face, I'm proud of what I just drew, but I'm uncertain whether you're going to be proud of what I just drew.
Yeah, and it's weird to see these people who don't look happy contrasted with this bright sunny light coming in the window that I feel like is supposed to make us feel at ease, but then the characters make us feel ill ease.
Yeah. Hey, something else I wanted to point out before we move on too far from it, going back to this first introduction to the world behind the canvas. In a lot of this issue, what we have looked at, the color was very flat. And once we go into the world behind the curtain, the color gets bolder. And at first, as I picked this book up to reread it for the first time in over a year, I thought to myself, like, is this book, is it just less vibrant than I remember? And I think that's intentional because, especially from the perspective of Art Brut, the world behind the canvas is where there are bright colors. Yeah. There is life. And the world outside is dull.
I think, yeah, even looking at the cover, this gives vibes like from the 70s, like going on some sort of mind trip kind of feel, but the colors aren't neon and they aren't as vibrant as I would expect for that art style.
Yeah.
They're all just a little muted. And when you go to the world behind the canvas, the colors aren't tied to reality. Like if you look at this background, there's trees drawn, but the field is purplish pink.
Yes.
So I feel like that's part of what makes it feel more vibrant is that it's not tied to reality. It's not green trees.
Cool. Yeah. It's surreal.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned the 70s sort of motif in the cover for the overall collection, because right here we're going to get to our backup story. And we have 2 pages where it just says in script on the first one, but wait, ... And then on the second one, there's more. But it has this background behind it that gives me a reminder of like, when they do that dun, 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 in between, say, like the previews and the feature presentation on like a drive-in movie.
Oh, okay.
You know, and the colors are different for the background on all 4 of the issues where they do the but wait, there's more. But on all of them, it felt like adjacent to the let's go out to the drive-in, you know that thing.
That's not something I'm familiar with. This is a acrylic pour-over painting.
Okay.
Then they've used some, I want to say it's alcohol, like rubbing alcohol, to make the bubbles and stuff. But this is a very popular style of painting that a lot of people try, like when they go look up like cool things to do on the internet. And it can be really beautiful. What's interesting here is it's not bright colors.
It's brown.
Black and brown.
Yeah.
And you kind of get to the warm coppery feeling of brown.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny that it's not bright colors.
Okay. That is so interesting. Okay, let's talk now about our backup story here in this first issue.
Which I like the backup stories. They're a lot more
they're peppier.
Happy-go-lucky.
Yeah, for sure. Did you ever watch the 1966 Batman television show?
I want to say yes, but not as a kid.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So it was on a lot in syndication when I was a kid. Obviously, I wasn't around in 1966. But this would be on, I don't know, USA Network or TNT in the evening or something like that. Whatever it was, I watched a lot of it, and it captured my imagination as a kid. It was, Batman. I came to love Batman in all of his forms, the dark, brooding Batman, the big hulking Batman, and the silly, sort of slapstick Adam West 1966 Batman from first that exposure. And the way that show would work reminds me a lot of how this is presented here. We have this narrative, and I'll just read you the first one, because people who have seen that old Batman show will recognize this sort of patter and sort of over-drama, and also the alliteration that goes into this. The continuing adventures of Art Brut, presenting here the incipient exploits of none other than Arthur Brut, the mad dream painter, and also his whimsical ward, Manny the wooden mannequin. When paintings are under attack, Mr. Brut is on the case. And was he ever in this, the forgotten, and honestly kind of forgettable, tale of the girl who lost a very small piece of jewelry? Which is great.
Not the girl with the pearl earring who lost a very small piece of jewelry.
That's right. At the Bureau of Artistic Integrity, a globe-spanning secret service dedicated to maintaining the status quo of our precious art, Director Jim O'Connor receives a disturbing telegram. And, we've got this very, Commissioner Gordon kind of character from that 1966 show. And he's sitting here and he says, jumping jelly beans in a jar. And, there's this earring has been purloined. And, of course, we see an image here of Vermeer's girl with a pearl earring. And
but But without the earring.
Without the earring, that's right. And, it's just a silly little story.
So what I love about this is the word alliteration, pilfered, purloined, pinched. Like, it definitely does have that patter of, like, old comic book style.
Yes.
Which is nice.
So we're going to see, presumably for the first time, Art Brut go into the world behind the canvas. And when he does, he goes in there and he meets the girl, and she's so upset. And then next thing we see, there are these giant oysters. And they've decided they want their pearl back, and that's how they've taken the earring from the girl of the painting.
They're not just oysters, though. They have spider or crab legs.
It's true. These are like sci-fi oysters.
Yes.
And they're huge. And so what Art Brut's solution here is he takes his paintbrush that he has in his hand that ends up serving throughout this story as like a magic wand of sorts. Mm-hmm. And he says, a shucking knife. That's what you use to take apart an oyster. And so he paints a shucking knife that ends up becoming basically his sword to take on these oysters. And so in doing so, he's going to recover the pearl, return it to the girl with the pearl earring once more. Our painting has been saved, and he's serving up some oysters on the half shell along with Manny. So this first backup story is just fun.
Yeah.
But we're going to see they start taking a darker turn after he has more time spent in the world behind the canvas.
Yeah, and he's presented more in the style that I associate with cartoons or comics like Batman. Like, his hair is less disheveled than we've seen it.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. He's in a better mind state. Well, let's move into issue 2, which is called Key of Dreams. And I'm going to go a little quicker through the story part itself because I really want to hear more from you about some of these different works of art. And so just to kind of run quickly through what happens in this issue, we have director Breslin, and she's trying to process this experience that she's had. Obviously, it's going to be disorienting going into the world behind the canvas. And at first, she's having this dream that she's in the shower, except instead of water coming out of her shower, it's like just these streams of all these bright colors that look like paint coming out. But going back into this world behind the canvas, we see a little more of what happened the first time that Art and Manny and director Breslin were all in there together. And they're walking around, and Art is like putting his ear to the ground, and he explains that the art itself is sick. And at some point, they encounter this giant mass with like teeth and a face. Art Brut will explain that this is a tumor. And then he uses his paintbrush kind of like a sword here, basically. He gets swallowed up inside this tumor and then just explodes it with color from the inside to kill it. But we learn the idea of these tumors within art that can hurt in real life, the paintings on the outside. But meanwhile, back in the outside world, director Breslin has to go about her day. And there's been another art crime that has taken place. So there's this community art class. It's called Make Like Matisse. And it's like an adult education thing. We get there and discover it's been a massacre. There were 8 students in the class. 7 are dead, and there's 1 surviving student. And director Breslin goes inside this classroom and sees all these adults sitting at their desks, head down on the desk with blood, and the blood kind of looks like red paint coming out of their mouths. But then there's this blood and red paint like everywhere on the walls, and we see this same
logo?
Yeah, the same sort of logo. It's referred to as an ideogram throughout the book. This logo up on the wall that, is kind of like a stretched face with a winking eye.
Yeah, but a flat mouth.
That's right.
It's not smiling.
Yep, flat mouth. And so the one surviving student is going to tell the story, and she said that it's normally a wonderful class, the people are nice, the teacher's nice, and they had a substitute teacher this day who was weird from the very beginning, and he came in and he put this weird painting up on an easel, and then he told all the students that Matisse said that painters must begin by cutting out their tongues. And so when he said that, all the other students in the class literally cut out their tongues and started bleeding to death. And then, of course, she delivers this news as well that tells director Breslin that, this is the same group. She said the substitute teacher looked like Andy Warhol.
Yeah.
So
crazy.
Weird. So weird. I looked this up with Matisse. Mm-hmm. Apparently that is, in fact, something that he said. Now, he wasn't trying to encourage artists to literally cut their tongues out of their mouth. But there is a quote that I
just assumed that was crazy talk.
Oh, no. And Who knows? Maybe I will be the next victim
It
of...
makes sense, though, because the idea is, like, speak with your visuals. Like, you've got to learn to speak through, not words, through the pictures.
Exactly. And, maybe I'll be the next person to have, some quote about the internet attributed to Abraham Lincoln, and I fall into this trap or whatever. But I think I found a legitimate art site that listed a bunch of quotes from Matisse. And one of them was him saying that the first thing a painter needs to do is to cut out their tongue, and then expands it to say something along the lines of, then you're left with no other choice except to express yourself through your painting. There's also a little, what's called just an epilogue here, and it's Dylan, and he's in therapy. And Dr. Oldenburg is meeting with him, and he's holding up these different pictures, and he shows Dylan a picture of one thing, and Dylan says, what he thinks it is, and it's not the correct object. And
This is just the creepy vibes all over again.
Oh, it's... Yeah.
The doctor's like, very good, every time he says a wrong answer.
Exactly. And then the last thing that the doctor holds up is a picture of a building. And the boy doesn't say building. He just says kaboom.
Yeah.
And then there's a page turn for the last page of the issue. And it's that building out in real life someplace else blowing up.
I mean, it's such a good build to the dramatic whatever's happening here. It's just, it feels like a really good hard cut in a movie.
Yes. Yeah. There's a Stephen King movie, I'm sure it was a Stephen King book, and where a character could sort of do that. Was it Firestarter, maybe? I don't know my Stephen King well enough.
I don't know him at all.
But I love this idea, though, that he is, with his art and with the things that he says, he is impacting the outside world.
And we're kind of reestablishing the thing with the cows. Like, the cows had X's fries, then all the cows are dead. We've got another page turn here where he says kaboom, and the building goes kaboom.
That's right. Let's look at the backup story here on this issue as well. Hey, maybe you can tell me, because I went right past the acrylic splatter. On
this is a lot
issue 1.
more in what I would expect when I look at acrylic pour-over painting.
Okay.
These bright colors.
So on our butt weight, there's more pages.
Yeah.
Okay, but you would say this is probably the same type of creation.
This is the same thing. You can get so many interesting details in that style of painting. You literally are pouring layers of color into a cup, and you might put some different additives into it, including, I want to say it's rubbing alcohol, but it might be something else that creates these little bubbles in it. And you just pour it over, and the color runs completely off the canvas. And it just makes this really interesting design that's not tie-dye, but feels akin to tie-dye.
Yeah, definitely a relative of tie-dye.
Yeah.
Well, so in the backup story, we are now featuring Pablo Picasso's Don Quixote. I've always sort of been fascinated by the idea of Don Quixote and who he was, and the idea of tilting at windmills as a metaphor. And so I was familiar with this piece from its image. I couldn't have told you anything about its creation. And so I was pretty excited to see that. And so in this world where art goes wacky, in this backup story, Art Brut has to be called in this time because it turns out Don Quixote is not so nuts. In fact, these windmills are turning into monsters, and they've got big mouths like they're chomping, and their blades are really long, and they look like arms that could hurt somebody. And so Manny and Art Brut are going to have to take them on. The conclusion that Art Brut comes to as he and Manny are starting to take on these windmills is that imaginary enemies are powered by fear of them. So all they had to really do was stop believing that the windmills were monsters, and that turns them back into regular old windmills. But as they come out of the painting now, Art is starting to show his first signs of mental deterioration. Director Jim says to him, "Oh, we'll get you on some meds. It'll be okay." Mm-hmm. So we're starting to see the impact that going into the world behind the canvas is having.
Yeah, these backup stories really help you understand where Art came from.
Yeah, and we'd been told early on that this director Jim was the director before Breslin, and so we know, this is going back in time a little ways. So you want to go on into issue 3? Or do you have something more you'd like to say about issue 2?
We went through it so fast. I thought we were going to go through it and then come back.
Is there anything you'd like to say about issue 3?
Oh, the cover art, it looks like the style of Jean-Michel Basquiat.
Oh, okay. So tell me about that.
So Basquiat did a lot of self-portraits and portraits that don't have any, don't look realistic at all. Mm-hmm. But a lot of his work, he was a black artist, is about inequality.
Okay.
And so his portrait that I'm familiar with the name of is Self-Portrait of a Heel. So, like, if you're like, I don't know how to spell Basquiat, look up Self-Portrait of a Heel.
Okay.
And you'll be able to find him and find his style. His work appears later in the book as well.
Oh, okay.
But this style, it's very street art-esque. But
Okay.
he worked on a canvas. And so we've got all these scribbles and what feels random, but is actually very organized and a very intentional style.
I never would have caught that.
Yeah.
And as I look at it more carefully now, in some ways it kind of reminds me of like a lot of the airbrush art that you would see in the 90s.
Okay.
At least in terms of the way the lettering looks, the way the lines are drawn. I mean, obviously it doesn't look like airbrush.
Right.
But
It looks like marker art. Like he
Yeah.
used like a big stick or like a big Posca pins are popular today, but like a really thick marker or like a paintbrush that was just really loaded. But he's definitely focused on line work, not solid colors or shading as much. I love the way the paint looks when Margot is taking the shower and it just turns into paint coming out.
yeah.
It is so hard when you set out to draw paint. It's one of those things that your mind goes, that should be easy, but it's really difficult. And so this is really beautiful.
Well, it has the impression of texture
Yes.
to it. Like I look at this paint and I think, okay, this isn't like the watercolor paint that I used to get when I was a little kid out of those little ovals.
This is a full bottle of paint that is spilling and dripping. Yeah, it's got a lot of dimension to it. I think the last thing I would just point out is that when we're entering the museum school, the paintings that are on display, those are Matisse.
Oh, cool.
So it's a painting like Matisse class, and there are paintings of Matisse in the window. And actually, he wasn't a painter. He was a collage artist. So he painted with scissors.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
What type of materials? Would we be talking about papers and things
Yeah,
like that?
like he cut his shapes out and then glued them down. And actually, he's known for like having a long stick with a marker on the end of it and standing like 8 feet away and drawing these shapes until he found one that he liked, cutting it out. And then he would tape them up on the wall as sort of his temporary canvas and play around with the arrangement until he was happy with it.
My goodness.
Yeah, he's a really cool artist.
Yeah. My mind craves order. Just craves order. Like, if I could turn my brain into like a Microsoft drop-down menu, with folders and subfolders,
Yeah.
that would be perfect for me. And, I mean, some people's brains don't work that way, and I can't imagine doing that kind of approach.
See, but the thing is that is order.
Okay.
It's starting with a mess and figuring out the order.
Okay.
Because when you have organic shapes, they're not going to stack evenly like books. So you got to figure out how they fit together nicely, like leaves on a tree. All the leaves need to see sunlight, otherwise the tree's going to drop them. So there's sort of this organic order. Then I turn the page and I remember when we're in the world behind the canvas and they're walking around, they're walking down these steps, and you look at this mountainside and there's steps going all directions.
Yes.
This is an M.C. Escher reference.
Okay.
So you probably have seen this image where it's like stairs going up and down, there are figures walking on them, and the doorways are upside down, and everything's going different directions. That's what's happening here on this mountainside.
Hannah, thank you for pointing all these things out. I'm trying to rush through the story, and for me, it's always the story that drives everything, and you're pointing out such cool stuff that, I am familiar with that Escher image.
Yeah.
Of course, I wouldn't have been able to say that's who it was. Yeah, and I zoomed right past that.
I love all the little references. I think you had said something about the artist talking about reworking these classic styles.
Yeah.
And like that idea of taking an Escher drawing that's famous and getting you to recognize it, even though it's not the same setting or the same style.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's such a cool thing.
Sure.
All right, now I'm ready.
Now you're ready to go on to issue 3? Well, issue 3 starts out with an art reference that I couldn't miss.
Yep.
The cover of issue 3, I love it. This was probably the thing that grabbed me the most out of the whole series. It is this white background, and it's the classic Andy Warhol Campbell soup can.
Yep.
Except it says Art Brut, where it would say Campbell's otherwise.
Yep. Unabridged issue 3. Now, I think this is so iconic, and we all recognize it, and it's a great reference to our villain. The other thing I just wanted to point out is that on the side, in the little golden letters, it says After Warhol. When you create a copy of an artist's work, you sign it your name and after the name of the artist.
Oh, okay.
So they're crediting the original artist, which is so interesting. And
cool.
cool.
Neat. And so that would be standard. That would be what would be expected.
Yeah, that's kind of like if you think about writing a paper and you reference a material, this is the visual version of that.
Oh, okay. Cool. All right, well, let's get into our story here for issue 3. So we're going to be back with Dr. Oldenburg. And now there's no question about it. If we didn't hint heavily enough before that Dr. Oldenburg was creepy and likely up to something no good, we see him sitting in his office, and then he reaches into a desk drawer and he pulls out an Andy Warhol wig and puts it on. And he goes back into this room behind his office where he has like a teenage boy, maybe 16, 17 years old, chained up by his hands. And he goes in, and this villain is like a Joker-level sort of lunatic villain. And he goes in and he starts cutting up this kid, like cutting his chest, and then he's using the blood like paint, and he's painting a smiley face with a winking eye on a canvas.
Yes, it's so dark.
It is.
Dark.
It is. In fact, as I was reading back through, I really wanted you to do these issues, and as I was reading back through it, I was like, "Oh, I forgot about this."
I mean, but it sets up the bad guy as being truly bad. You know, it makes you go, "Okay, we've got to stop him." And I just feel bad. He calls the kid by name. He calls him Jeffrey, and he's got him chained up to a pipe above his head, so there's like no rest for him.
That's right.
And yeah, he's been cut. He's using his paint to paint on this canvas. This is so sinister.
Perfect word for it. Yes, it is sinister. And while he's right in the middle of this, and it seems to be like his sort of personal release, which is weird, one of the one-eyed or eye-patched villains, henchman, comes in, and he's like, "I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but it looks like one of our students may be dream painting." Yeah,
and they call them sensitives. So they're these people who are in touch with the world behind the canvas, and it's interesting because you definitely see this power dynamic where the henchman is like, "Hey, I don't mean to interrupt," and the main villain, who's dressed like Andy Warhol, is like, "Oh, it's fine." But it's so interesting to read his rhetoric about perfection and removing problems, because you just see this sort of like ideology behind what he's doing come together, and you see it not make a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm going to have you talk to me about that. So just to take the reader along with us, Dylan is the sensitive. Dylan is the student who they've identified as possibly dream painting. And so they take him to a place called The Room. And The Room is all white. There's no color, and there's also no features in the room. And from Dr. Oldenburg's point of view, it is the perfect room. And when I say it has no features, I mean even though they are sitting at a table, like it doesn't appear that there is like a 90-degree angle where the floor meets the wall.
Yeah.
Somehow it's tabula rasa.
If this was a movie, we would do a cut from a dark room to this light room where there's so much light that your eyes can't process it from the change, and you're just being whited out.
Yeah.
Overexposed.
And that's where Dr. Oldenburg is really sort of explaining his idea of what it is that this group, and we've learned that the group is called The Correction.
Yeah.
Of what they are trying to do. And that is, apparently it is Dr. Oldenburg's theory that even in these great masterworks of art, there are imperfections.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me is a lot of the artworks he's picking are ones that have interesting things to talk about because they're not seen the same by person to person. So like the Mona Lisa has a lot of interesting talking points because why doesn't she have eyebrows? Is she smiling? We're going to get to the scream. Why is this guy screaming? Why are the colors so crazy? And like his paintings that he doesn't like, it's the strong emotion or the strong controversy that I feel like is triggering him.
Sure. It's what makes it art that is worthy of its credit.
Yeah.
And yet he sees that as the imperfection. And what he wants is to correct what's wrong with those pieces of art. And his philosophy, we'll learn this later from a character who was a former, we'll learn in this issue. He was a former student at the Institute, and after he was released from the Institute because he wasn't a sensitive, he ended up becoming the teacher of that community art class. And Dr. Oldenburg came by and told him to take the day off so he could go in and be the substitute the day of the massacre there. But we learned from this man that he always had such a hard time creating art because he would have this perfect image in his head, and he was always afraid that once he started to put it onto paper or canvas or whatever medium, it would be an imperfect recreation of what he saw in his head.
Yeah, and what a terrible thing to put him with a doctor who has that same fear and
Yes. Well, and the doctor has explained to him the philosophy that the only thing to do with imperfection is to destroy it.
Right.
And that goes back to seeing when they were in the Louvre in issue 1, and we were first introduced to Dr. Oldenburg in his Andy Warhol costume. He's got that flamethrower, and he's trying to destroy all the art in there. So we have this really cool page. And so Dylan now is, I guess he is dream painting, or he is, whether he knows it or not, he's entering the world behind the canvas. And you see the background that we would normally recognize from Edvard Munch's The Scream.
Right.
Except it's Dylan in front of it.
Yes.
And it
Yes.
matches the style of the background from The Scream perfectly.
It does.
Except the image of Dylan is in his normal art style
Yeah.
throughout this book.
But he has the same level of fear as I think the original character.
Yes.
Like he's exuding the same emotion.
Yes. So separately from this, but at the same time, Art and Manny are going inside the Scream. They're entering back into, the world behind the canvas. They've had a bunch of pieces of art brought to this warehouse that the BAI has, because it's Art Brut's theory that taking all these pieces of fine art and looking into them is going to be the way to solve their problem. And so they're going to go into Vox because anytime things are bad, Vox has some thoughts about it, apparently. And I should say this, Vox is the name that the character from The Scream goes by in the world behind the canvas.
Yes.
And so he gives, literally voice to what all those screams are. And Vox is in total fear, and he points Manny and Dylan to some of Dr. Oldenburg's henchmen that are there inside the Scream as well. And Dylan is with them. And Manny and Art are going to have to fight off these henchmen who are themselves like tumors, like that painting was in the last issue. And we're starting to realize that Dylan being in there means he's kind of a tumor on the art as well.
Yeah. It's just sad. He's being used in such a vicious way. I love Margot's sort of summary of the Scream by Edvard Munch, the ultimate artistic meditation on anxiety, an infinite shriek passing through nature. Like, that is so honest about the artwork and so correct. Edvard Munch had a lot of tragedy in his life, and a lot of his paintings exude this tragic sort of character, great sadness or anxiety. His work's just full of it because it was what he felt so strongly.
Sure. What would you call this art style that Munch painted in?
So I'm going to get this wrong, but there is a expressive style that I want to say is German that he is a part of. And there are other painters from that time. They were very fed up with society and government. It was dissatisfaction with the way that government was running things because they felt like there was a disconnect between what the people needed and what the government thought they needed.
And so to sort of put a cap on Dylan being inside the Scream, toward the end of the issue, we're going to see that in real life, Dylan is still sitting in the room and he's drawing the Scream. But the process of drawing the Scream is causing Dylan to start to bleed from one of his eyes and from his nose a little bit. And so for Art Brut, we know that it's interfering with his sanity, and it's having physical manifestations in how it harms Dylan.
We also know that that's not unique to Art Brut because we see that happening to Margot. As she's entered the paintings with him and come out, she feels this sense of disconnect, and she at one point tells him, I can't go back in a painting or I'm going to lose my mind, like I'm going to go crazy. And you get this sense as well that that's kind of what happened to our doctor who's looking like Andy Warhol, and that's kind of what he's doing to Dylan.
Yeah, that's right. Earlier in this issue, I talked about Margot going and meeting with the teacher from that community art class. She had told Art, I'm not going with you inside the Scream. I'm going to go run down this other lead in the real world, and you go behind the canvas. But she explains, like, I can't do it again.
Yeah. So it's really interesting in this volume because we're bringing together this idea of this fear that artists have of, like, what I imagine in my head, I can't get it to come out on the canvas. No matter what I put down, it's imperfect. But we're seeing, like, a hero's way of dealing with that and a villain's way of dealing with it. And the poor guy in between, the teacher who, like, didn't have the right people to help him deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a thing I see all the time as a teacher. My students are like, I can't make it right. Like, they'll draw one line on the paper and want to wad it up and throw it away. And I say, that's what erasers are for. But also, like, it's not going to be perfect. Let's make bad art until you start making what you want.
So this idea is really expressed well in I love the music of Bright Eyes. You ever listen to Bright Eyes? This idea comes through in a song that he did sometime around 2005, 2006 called Waste of Paint. He talks about his friend dealing with this idea of meaninglessness in his life and that everything that he does creatively is a waste of paint or a waste of tape for music. And similar idea here, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's that it's perfect inside
I
the
have
head.
literally had students who didn't want to waste my materials. And I've said to them, it's not a waste. You gained practice.
Yeah.
Like, it's not a waste that you made that thing and it was bad. Because now you got that out of your system and you've gained some experience and now you, like, have a direction to go. No matter what you want to be good at, you've got to practice it and you've got to be bad at it for a little while.
Yeah. So I think of the student that has the anxiety about having to stand in front of the class and read their essay or read aloud from the textbook or something like that. And, you know, it's funny, I never had any gifts when it came to the arts that you would do in art class, painting or drawing or anything like that. Terrible. Absolutely terrible. But, you know, I went into it with all the confidence of of the world's worst artist.
That's great.
I suppose. And so I never cared that my drawings came out bad. But do you see a lot of anxiety from students?
Yeah, for sure.
And I suppose it's probably the ones who care the most about what their work looks like.
Yeah, well, and it varies. So when I was studying art and studying child development, middle school is such a hard time. There are a couple of things happening that are in conflict with each other specific to art. So you're becoming more self-aware. This is when kids start picking on each other, making fun of each other for being different, and also start being super harsh on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And like, oh yeah, that stupid thing that they said about me, that's true, and that's why it hurt.
Mm-hmm.
They're also, their brains are just developing to where they can look at their surroundings and draw them.
Okay.
So before that, you'll see a lot of like scribbles and stuff, and it doesn't matter if things make sense. I'll draw this circle and put 10 fingers on it, and that's a hand, even though, you know, that doesn't make sense. They're starting to get to that point where they're super judgmental, but they're also unlocking an ability to be able to do something about it, like to get better at something.
Oh, yeah.
And so teaching 6th through 8th grade, like, I really have to be careful about the feedback I give to spin it positive, to be like, you are trying a new thing, you are learning a new skill, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but I need you to try it, and like really build them up and say, you know, I see this thing that you did, and that's a really good sign. It tells me how hard you're working. And it's so tough because they will come back at me, oh, you're my teacher, you have to say that. I'm like, actually, I'm your teacher and I have to grade you on it? I actually have to be a little bit harsh with you because I'm trying to get you to grow. So yeah, it's a tough time. And you definitely see these kids who are afraid to draw because they're afraid of judgment from themselves and from their peers. And you know, you have to set up boundaries. Like, we're going to be a positive atmosphere. If you have something to say, it's got to be encouraging or it's got to be helpful.
Hannah, you've struck on something that has become, I think, a leitmotif running through the graphic novel Apostle in all of its podcasts, and that is middle school is the worst. Like, how does anybody get through middle school?
Yeah.
Oh, but kids, if you're out there, we've all done it. We've all felt that way.
Yeah, and it gets better. You get past it, you become more comfortable in your own skin. It's a good thing.
Yeah, that's right.
The other thing I want to touch on in this volume is I love Vox. He is such a great adaptation of the original Scream. Like, his bald head, he's just perfect. Like, this style is the same as the other characters, but it feels right on him because he looks that way in the Scream.
Yeah.
Like that very emaciated face.
All right, well, let's talk about the backup story in this issue 3 as well. And so I guess we've got more on our but wait, there's more pages. And I guess we've got more of that acrylic.
Yeah, it's that acrylic pour. This one's interesting because it's a swirl, so they definitely did something special with the way they poured it.
Mm-hmm. And they've added some blue
Yes.
into the like coffee kind of colors that we saw in issue 1.
Definitely like a dark cobalt blue, yeah.
So in this story, we're going to be in the world of Grant Wood's American Gothic. And so, people will be familiar with this one, the farmer and his, I guess it's supposed to be his daughter, right?
It's his daughter, yes.
Okay, it is his daughter.
So, funny thing, the people who posed for this painting, so Grant Wood painted the American Midwest. This painting he did because he liked the house. It's a Gothic style of architecture, so that's where the title American Gothic comes
Okay.
from. The man is his dentist.
Really?
And so that's who stood in for that.
Not a farmer.
And the woman is his sister, is Grant Wood's sister.
Okay.
And they actually posed separately for this painting. So he's got 3 different parts that he pieced together the old-fashioned, no Photoshop way.
Wow. Oh, how cool.
Yeah. His style is so pretty. Like, it's very smooth, which feels modern because a lot of stuff that we computer generate loses a lot of texture. And his style feels like the painted version of that, and like we're building to something.
Okay. And the story for our silly comic book, I suppose, that we have here is that something akin to the devil, which is basically one of these art tumors, has gotten inside of the farmer.
Yes.
And now the farmer has, if we see an image of the American Gothic painting recreated, and except that it's got like devil horns and like a devil pitchfork instead of a regular farming pitchfork.
Yeah. I love it. I love the humor in this one. So we go from, they're like coming onto the farm, figuring out what's happening. There's pigs flying. They're like devil pigs. And Manny says, when pigs fly, and Brut says, low-hanging fruit. Like, that's not a good enough joke. And I just love all the funny beats in this one. He's using his paintbrush as like a magic wand here, catching the pigs. And then they come to the barn where the devil farmer is, and it says fresh new hell. And I just think, what fresh hell is this?
That's right. Hey, and to go back to our Gideon Falls episode with Stephen Hovatter, I gotta say W. Maxwell Prince is on my side here about a barn being terrifying. This is where the devil lives in this episode, or in this issue. So chalk one up in my category. But yeah, we go inside, and that's where we encounter the farmer sitting on a throne of hay with his big devil pitchfork and horns.
Yeah, and the female figure, his daughter, kind of like defeated on the ground. And it's interesting, they're a little back and forth, and, he's insinuating things about the painting. And there's a lot of debate about who are these figures in this painting? Why do they look unhappy? And to touch on that, previously, if you smiled in a photo, you were the crazy person.
Okay.
Like, smiling in a photo was weird. You wanted to be taken seriously. And so, like, their flat affect is kind of standard.
Okay.
We're, at the same time, that time period, evolving out of that.
Okay.
And so it's just kind of like a callback, honoring tradition, but still moving forward. And the humor here is nice to me. It's refreshing because we've got these kind of talking about the Bible and things like that. I feel like a lot of humor that is made around Christianity is poking fun at it.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like this is poking fun at Christianity.
Okay.
I feel like it's kind of like going alongside it.
Okay. And so Art Brut's solution here to the problem of the devil inside this farmer is to use his paintbrush now to draw this devil out, almost like a big vacuum or something like that, to suck him right out of the farmer. And when he comes out, he ends up in Art Brut's hand and looks like the image of the devil or the demonic imp that we see in Henry Fuseli's The Nightmare.
Yeah.
Did I pronounce Fuseli right?
As right as I know.
Okay, yes, I'll take that. And then, in fact, he deposits that devil figure right into that painting.
Yeah, and I love that the little blurb at the top there. That's this, by the way, 18th century Swiss oil painting. Ain't it creepy? I'm like, yep, sure is.
It sure is. Oh, man. All right, well, let's talk about issue 4, our final issue. And as we get there, I was going to just brush right past the cover that just says art in 3 letters, and it sort of reminds me of one of those, like, love signs that people pose with. But is there some deeper thing that I've missed here?
Robert Indiana is the artist who created those.
Okay.
And he is a printmaker first. And so when he created his sculptures, they're based on a series of different prints that he did first. And he has made 50 copies of this statue around the world, and several of them are in different languages, including like Japanese and Chinese, and they all are 4 characters. So where Manny and Art are standing is the letter E usually. Mm-hmm. But they're all 4 characters with that upper right-hand corner one being slightly askew.
Okay.
And so it's definitely a hard callback to that.
I love this. How did you not just love this book?
Oh, I love all the Easter eggs, all the art stuff. It's the existential part that I'm like, oh, no, I don't like feeling this way.
Hey, I get that. And Hannah, thank you for helping us dive so deep into this. Every one of these discussions that I've had with someone has made me think more deeply about the story that's being told. And it sounds ludicrous when I try to explain to somebody that I do a comic book podcast where I have my friends come on and we talk about some comic book, and it's sort of like a book club, but we end up always finding deeper meaning in these books.
I think every artist and comic book writer, I think they all would love to hear you diving this deep, because I think every artist, they create something and it means something so personal to them, but most people are just going to glance over it.
Yeah.
They're not going to dive that deep. And so I bet any artist who listened to this would be like, yes.
Yeah, you hear that, Martine Morazzo? You should be my biggest fan. Well, I hope so. But boy, it's meaningful to me. And I just want to say that, like, getting deeper into these books has been meaningful to me. And it's been so fun to sit down and have these long conversations with people.
Yeah, and I love diving into, like, I've never read something that had so many, like, symbols or things to allude to that was specifically art.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh, yes.
Well, and I think that's something that's special about W. Maxwell Prince. A lot of comic book readers won't have encountered something quite like this before either.
Right. So this is volume 4, correct?
It is.
Okay, so this is the last one?
Or issue 4, yes.
Issue 4,
Yep.
forgive me. So we see Art Brut, looks like he's dream painting, and he's going into an office that says Son of Man, Gill about, I don't know how to say that, CPA. But when we turn the page, we see the person in there is the man with the apple over his face. And I think most of us, this is one of the most famous paintings. Like if you Google like list of 10 most famous paintings, this is on there. It's called The Son of Man.
Yes, with the green apple over his face and the bowler hat on his head.
Yes, the bowler hat.
And it turns out that's Art Brut's CPA. He's his accountant. And then this issue is called The Unknown Knowns, which I don't know if that means anything in the art world. That I think of this famous memo that Donald Rumsfeld had written back in the early days of the War on Terror, where he talked about there are the known knowns and the unknown unknowns and the known unknowns and this kind of thing. It's kind of a famous, memo for people who study politics and history.
It reminds me of when you go to like a help page and it's like known issues with this product and you're just like, there's not a fix. It's just a work in progress.
It's just a known issue. Sure.
So they're having this conversation, and in the background, we see all these interesting paintings. And I just want to point out that Rene Magritte is the artist of The Son of Man. Mm-hmm. These paintings in The Son of Man's office are all also by that artist.
Oh, cool.
So it's just like Rene Magritte's world.
So I was looking at some of those paintings in the background, and I didn't recognize any of them.
Okay. So I feel like most people would recognize this is not a pipe.
Okay.
So it is a painting of a smoking pipe. Mm-hmm. And in I want to say French, it says, "This is not a pipe." And it's just, he is a surreal artist, and he's calling attention to the fact that the thing that we paint is not the thing itself.
Oh,
and it's
okay.
just kind of like the first meme.
Okay.
You know, like, but he did a lot of interesting things with like the sky. His clouds are really beautiful, and they're weirdly juxtaposed with things that feel flat when they're so three-dimensional. But his artwork is so cool, and I have seen a lot of memes like of the Mario pipe,
Okay.
where it says "This is not a pipe."
Oh, okay.
So that's a reference to that artwork.
Huh. How cool. I'm not supposed to be learning on a Sunday afternoon while we record this, but that's awesome. So over the course of this conversation that Art has with his CPA here, who has an apple over his face the whole time they're talking, he gets basically a list of places that Art, Brut, and Manny are going to need to go to try and track down Dylan and basically find their way to the room. And so Art ends up leaving this office with a list of paintings he's going to need to look at. And so
Yeah.
we've got A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jette by George Seurat. One of my favorite paintings next, Nighthawks by Edward Hopper.
Love it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Guernica by Pablo Picasso. And then finally the last stop is going to be The Room.
Yeah, and the Son of Man is like, I don't know what the room is, and we're going to find out.
Yeah, we sure are. Now, in the meantime, so we know what Art Brut is going to have to do. And I know that you just turned the page on the book in front of you, and it's this page on the wall. It's this page that shows the wall in the warehouse at the BAI that has all the different paintings. And I can see the look on your face like you are ready to talk about them. I want to put a pin in that for just 1 second. So I just want to kind of explain a little bit about what the story of Director Breslin is at the same time, because it has less of the art implication,
Yes.
I suppose. Director Breslin goes to the Institute. She had tracked the clues to find out where this Institute was. And she goes in there and she gets attacked by that student that Dr. Oldenburg had been torturing earlier, and she ends up having to kill him. And, the boy thanks Breslin for killing him.
It's so sad.
It's so sad. Yeah.
So sad.
I was trying to figure out how this was going to be tied up as a happy ending. It don't get tied up as a happy ending.
No, and it's one of those moments where you feel a little bit of, okay, this is fine. Like, it can get better, even though it's a very tragic end to his life. Like, at least he was happy for it.
It was relief.
Yes.
It was relief from torture, literal.
Yes.
So she goes on from there to have a shootout with those one-eyed goons in those white suits that you liked so much. Then she finally encounters Dr. Oldenburg, and he's dressed fully in his Warhol costume at this point. So we're doing the full-on Joker thing. In the course of this fight, Director Breslin ends up cutting out one of Oldenburg's eyes, and he just runs off at this point. And so as far as we know, really by the end of the story, before we get into the backup, he's just out of the picture.
Yeah. When I got to this point, I was like, yes, the bad guy gets what he deserves. Like, he's losing that eye that he's been taking from everybody else.
Yes.
And so it felt like some justice.
Absolutely. And then Director Breslin finds herself now just right outside of the room. And so let's go back to Art Brut and our giant wall of paintings that we have at the BAI. So what all are you seeing on this?
So when I was reading this, I really had to be like, Hannah, you have to finish the book. You can't stop right here and just nerd out. But I did go back and I wrote down a list of each artwork that I knew and kind of gave myself a pop quiz because I'm a nerd and I'm a teacher.
You had to flex some muscles.
And honestly, I can identify most of the genres. There were 5 paintings that I was like, I have no idea what this is. I don't know what this artwork is. But most of them, I could identify the genre, and at least half of them, I would say I knew the artist or the title of the work. And some of them really surprised me. And I won't go into all of it because not everybody wants to listen to me say all that.
But I see that you have in front of you.
But I have all of it. For sure.
A list with pink and blue notes for different indicating
Pink
different
means
things.
I got it correct, and blue means I didn't know that.
Well, you know what? And that's fine that you don't want to read a list of like 27 works of art off to us.
Yeah.
But why don't you hit some of the highlights for
So
us?
some of the highlights here, this is where we see Basquiat's work again in the lower right corner. There's sort of this large painting with a yellow background, and this is called Hollywood Africans. And so that's touching again on that a lot of his work was about inequality and how African Americans or Africans are perceived and treated. There are some definite callouts here. I love the work of Kandinsky. So in the middle, we see these two paintings that are just like abstract shapes. Those are two paintings that I like to show to my students when we talk about abstract art. There's a lot of cubist work here. There's one that's called Nude Descending the Staircase, but if you can find a figure in it, you are amazing, because there's not one. And this other cubist work is called like a man playing a guitar, and there's no figure, there's no guitar in it. The thing I always like to talk about with Picasso is that he invented many styles of art, including Cubism. And when he would get bored with a style, he would invent a new one. He reinvented himself at least 4 times. And so that's why he's so famous, is because he's so influential. We've got some color field painting here, which is paintings where the artist didn't care about representing anything anymore.
Okay.
They just wanted you to see that this is a painting, and they wanted you to see these colors and how the colors feel. So we've got this big painting that just looks like a big red blurry edge square with a rectangle that's blue below it that is also blurry edged. That's a color field painting.
You know, it's funny, and you're right. I mean, it's nothing but colors on this canvas, and yet I look at it and it gives me the distinct impression of like the Great Plains of the United States with a storm red sky over maybe some fields of grain or something like that.
He has a pair of paintings that are called Adam and Eve, and my students, when I would show them that, they'd be like, but why? Because it's like a black bar across a white canvas. Like, it's so simplistic, but at the same time, this is later after the camera has been invented, and artists are going, but what am I doing? Because I don't need to be realistic anymore. So what do I want to explore? We've got The Kiss, which is a very famous artwork. This artist, I want to say Klimt, he does a lot of collage work and often has a lot of gold, kind of metallic in his work. And you've probably seen his stuff on like folders and things. He'll be on like a calendar notebook and stuff like that.
Okay.
And then we've got Matisse's work over here again, who is the artist workshop. We've got 2 of his paintings in here.
I want to ask you about this. It's a blue figure against a white background, and you say this is one of the Matisse paintings.
Yes.
Because I feel like, and it looks like the image of a female body.
Yes, it is.
And is this what we see a lot of times in sculptures recreating this? I feel like maybe even somewhere in Little Rock, there might be a sculpture that basically recreates this image, not as blue, but in like a bronze.
There is a lot of sculpture, especially modern sculpture, that is abstracting the human form, and so we take like the nude human form and we simplify it into more simple shapes. So I don't know if they're being directly inspired by Matisse, but they are influenced by him and other modern artists who kind of took license with realism and just went, okay, how do I want to show this?
Before we go into the journey, and really we can pass pretty quickly through the journey, I think, but we'll see over the course of this comic that Art, Brut, and Manny are going to pass through the Sunday afternoon painting. They're going to pass through Nighthawks. And they encounter Dylan at Nighthawks in that diner, and they cause the diner to explode. Or Dylan causes the diner to explode. And before that, he has killed all the patrons that are sitting at that bar in Nighthawks.
Yeah. Oh, one last thing about this page. If you look at Brut's canvas, the painting is of himself leaving the Son of Man's office.
Oh, you're right.
So that's his dream painting.
Sure, like his way of travel, basically.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have a few of the other paintings there on the wall that we've already looked at. American Gothic, the girl with the pearl earring. And so he, in fact, goes on this journey through all these paintings over the course of our book, and I sort of explained what happens in Nighthawks, and I think you could say basically the same thing or something similar to it happens in.
It's like they're running through and they're just barely too late, because we see Dylan in each of the paintings, but the destruction has already happened and Dylan is moving on.
Yeah. Did you want to talk any about either the Sunday Afternoon, Nighthawks, or Guernica?
I just really appreciate how the artist of this comic book captured their styles, because the Sunday Afternoon is pointillism. So his drawings, besides Dylan, like the monsters that are created, are also done in pointillism. Like they're little dot shadow creatures.
Okay, and that's right. And it's called pointillism because it's like the point of the
Yes.
pen or the brush that you're just making little dots.
It's layers of dots built up, and so like if you look close at his paintings, you lose focus, you see the dots. You have to move away to see the image.
Wow, okay. And you certainly see the dots more distinctly when it's close up on Manny in the recreation here.
Right. And then we move into Nighthawks. I love this painting. This artist has is known for his paintings that feel lonely and empty. And so we definitely feel that here, and we see the style change, which feels more similar to the original style of the comic. But there's a little bit more smoothness to the shading. And they're catching up with Dylan, and he says kaboom and blows up the diner.
And before you move on from Nighthawks, I'm just a music guy. I love music, and Tom Waits is an artist. I like musicians that have those voices that maybe are an acquired taste for a lot of people or a hard-to-acquire taste for some people. I just tend to be drawn to them, and Tom Waits has got sort of this, like, Rolf the Dog, like gravelly kind of, voice. But he has an album called Nighthawks at the Diner. And so it expands on the title a little bit, but the cover art is highly reminiscent of Nighthawks, and it's just such a cool image.
Thing.
Yeah, it's a great adaptation of that. And then what about Guernica?
I love when we go into Guernica because it's such a good representation of Picasso's style. I love the commentary that Manny's like, I love being in here, and Brut is like, I hate it here. Everything's so fragmented. And I look around and I can see aspects from the original painting, but then we also have these kind of like spider creatures. They look like machine toys that have like a bunch of nails stuck in them or have long spidery legs, and Brut is slashing them to pieces. And I was like, I don't remember those from Guernica. And then later we see that is Dylan's drawing. Yeah,
Dylan has drawn those into Guernica. Before we move on from that piece, Guernica, would that be considered surrealism?
No, this is cubism.
Cubism, okay.
Yeah, cubism disjoints things. It cuts things into flat pieces. Often we'll see the same face from multiple angles within the same painting, and it can be very jarring. It's hard to interpret. Guernica is about a bomb going off, and so things being disjointed is very perfect for that kind of state of mind, and it captures the feeling of that very well. If you look at all the individual faces in that painting, they seem distressed.
Yeah.
And that is what would be happening after a bomb went off.
All right, now we got to talk about the most troubling part of this whole book. And this is it's disturbing to look at, it's disturbing to talk about. And so it's going to bother some listeners. Yeah. But we get finally to the White Room, and Art Brut and Dylan are facing off, and they have sort of a moment of understanding, basically. And you can tell that Art feels some compassion here for Dylan, and Dylan also feels some responsibility. I think he's figured out by this point that he is doing something that's harming the real world.
It's so sad because he's stating it from a child's perspective of not fully understanding what's happening, but knowing that something is wrong.
That's right. And Art is trying to explain to him, in an adult trying to explain to a child kind of way, something that you could never explain, which is, I'm here to kill you.
Yeah. And the thing, Brut, you can tell he's not used to talking to children.
Yeah.
Because he's harsh in what he says. It's not like candy-coated in any kind of way. He's not trying to speak in a way to be better understood by a child. He's just being upfront.
Yeah, but I don't think he's being intentionally cruel.
No, he's not being cruel. It's just what he has to say is never going to be easy to hear.
Yeah. And, what he tells the boy is, and I'll just, read from the panels. He says, "No, you're a tumor, a bad thing that hurts art and in turn hurts people. You're an art problem, kiddo, and it's my job to kill you." And then they have, kind of a tender moment. The boy starts crying and he asks, "Is it going to hurt?" And Art says, "I'd be lying to you if I said no." And, the kid says he's scared. And Art is kind of trying to, he tells him, "You don't have to be scared anymore. Not anymore." And then the boy is crying, and we don't actually see the act. The next thing we see is Art coming out of the White Room, and he's meeting Director Breslin, and his head is down, and he's sad, and he's telling her, "I've had enough of this BAI nonsense. I'm out of here. Don't try and find me. You guys are nuts."
Well, he says, "I'm crazy."
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And he says, "I'm not going to hurt anybody else." And he runs off.
Yeah, it's kind of like he doesn't like what he did, but he had to do it, and he's over it. He doesn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah. In between the damage that going into the world behind the canvas has done to Art's mind, and then, of course, the damage it's done to his soul as well, he's finished. Well, 2 months later, Director Breslin is back in her office, and she gets a note that comes in, and it's directed to Director Breslin, and it's open immediately. And then it's got this ideogram, this same image of the elongated face with the one closed eye, and it says, "We're still watching."
Oh,
and
chills.
then, I know, right? And then we're taken off to a cabin in the woods in the Netherlands, and we have Dr. Oldenburg, and he's sitting there in a chair, and he's talking to someone. We don't see who it is that he's speaking to.
And he's got an eye patch over the eye that was stabbed.
That's right.
And he's wearing the Andy Warhol wig.
Yeah.
So he is in character.
Still in character, and he's apologizing for failing to accomplish his mission, whatever it was. And so we realize that while he was the big bad of this story, there was a bigger bad behind the bad, I guess. Yeah. A supervillain lurking. And for all his apologies, this supervillain explains to him that in recompense for what he has failed to accomplish, Dr. Oldenburg offers to cut off his ear, his own ear. And the boss responds, "That won't be necessary, Andrew," calling him Andy Warhol. "You did everything you could. And as for Brut and Breslin, we've done what we set out to do. We've let them know that the correction is about its work, and we have a final page turn."
Oh.
He says, "We left an impression, and we see who it is that Andy Warhol's character is talking to."
Van Gogh.
It's Vincent van Gogh, and he's sitting at an easel, and he's painting his self-portrait.
Yep, the same self-portrait that Dylan was drawing.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "We left an impression," which he's an impressionistic painter. So we've got that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, "No, Van Gogh, I love you. You can't be the bad guy. I don't like it."
Well, this certainly does leave us knowing that there's potentially more story that could be told in the world of Art Brut. And so then we get, but wait, there's just a little more. And it's not this enamel pour-over anymore that's on those pages.
It's a rainbow.
Just a rainbow color, yeah. And then we have our final story in it. This time it's not Art Brut and Manny actually solving an art crime of some kind, but rather we see that all of this dream painting and all of this going into the world behind the canvas caused Art to totally lose his faculties, and he is now nude and walking down a street.
Maybe you can clarify this for me. All the other ones have been flashbacks to before the current story, but this is a epilogue.
No, this is a flashback that is going to bring us right up to the beginning of our story.
Okay.
So we'll see here as we turn the page, when Art is found, he's walking down this, looks like an interstate basically, and he's muttering about giant oysters that wanted their pearls back and windmills that had faces, and the farmer was possessed, and of course no one knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And then we see that director Jim and Breslin as they are standing there watching Art Brut being loaded into an ambulance. And Director Jim says, "Well, I guess that's it for Art Brut, and also it looks like it's time for me to retire." And then the last thing we see is Art Brut being taken back into that room in the mental hospital where we met him at the very beginning of issue 1.
So we've come full circle.
That's right. And then there's a little page with some summary and stuff. And then we've got, this is pretty typical in a collected graphic novel, is we've got what they call a cover gallery, and it's just a bunch of the alternative variant covers that you could have gotten for some of the different issues along the way. And were any of those covers that stood out to you particularly?
So after the one where he's like holding his paintbrush and it says Art Brut around it, and we see all like the characters that have been in the story in the background.
Right.
The next two are definitely referencing like works that I recognize. Like we have the one referencing Rene Magritte's This Is Not a Pipe. It says, this is not a comic book. The other one has Manny and it says, who's your Dada? Dada art is a style that is just random and crazy. It was rebelling against war. So it makes sense in the mind of the artist, but not the eye of the viewer.
Okay. I do love that. Who's your Dada?
Yes, yes. And so this is referencing some work of like Duchamp or somebody like that. And then the next page, we have the detective here. She is standing on a seashell, and this is definitely The Birth of Venus,
Yes.
which is a classic painting that I think most of us would recognize if we saw it.
Hannah, wow, we've had a lot to talk about here, and I've enjoyed every second of it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And any like closing thoughts before we wrap up Art Brut?
Yes, but Art Brut is wrapped up. I have brought you something to read in return.
Oh, fantastic. I didn't know you were going to do that.
Nope. So I read this and I did enjoy all the like little insights and the exploration. The style is not my style. So I like this manga, which is Fruits Basket.
Okay.
It is a 23 book series.
Okay.
But I brought you the first 3. This is what's covered in the anime.
Okay.
So you don't have to read this.
I'm going to read this.
Awesome. But I thought that this would be a good start, especially since these volumes are like multiple issues. I was like, okay, I'm going to bring him multiple issues. This is definitely a lot more lighthearted, and I think that you really like kind of dark and mystery and kind of like cop things.
Yes.
This is not that.
That's okay.
But I hope that you enjoy it, because I know that you haven't really gotten to manga.
I haven't, and thank you. You know, I've been talking with Travell about him introducing me to one, and we just haven't gotten around to it, and you're putting one in my hands.
Yep.
So I'm not going to avoid it. I am going to sit down and read that, and I'm so excited.
Yay.
Maybe we can come back and talk about it?
That'd be great.
Okay, so
And
cool.
If you get through these first 3 and you're like, what's the rest of the story? I have all 23. I will
Yes.
loan them to you.
Well, excellent. Hannah, thank you. This has been wonderful. To all of our listeners out there, thank you for going with us through this book. I will see you next Monday morning, and until then, keep reading those comics.